great pleasure to be here. It's wonderful to honor Steve. I'd also like to thank Sakura for shepherding this project so efficiently, amazing. I must say that everybody seems to have had a really good time writing their piece for the Festschrift. I didn't. I had to go through all of Steve's work, and it's a lot. As you can see outside on the table with all his books, he exceeded his lifetime quota for publishing massively. So I don't know what kind of punishment awaits you for doing that. In any case, it also was a hard experience because, you know, it's very dense and interesting, and I discovered what I already knew, which is how influential and field-defining and field-shaping his work was, and then immediately a kind of a comparative evaluation with my own work sets in, and deep depression follows over my insignificance and my failures, and so I found it really hard, but I did it, and I'm glad that I did, that I took the opportunity to become familiar again with Steve's work and to discover some of the things that I hadn't encountered before. Let's see whether my PowerPoint works here. If I just press something, nothing happens. So we might need another minute or so to get it working. So in any case, I think this is what we were all told to use, and almost everybody complied with having this wonderful line drawing of Steve up on our PowerPoints. So I think Steve obviously had and continues to have an amazing career, substantially, you know, influencing migration research around the world. I think his contribution is mostly by sharpening our conceptual apparatus, by bundling various kind of streams of research and giving them a conceptual focus. And I think that's his main contribution that he has made over and over again. You know, other people have made some empirical claims, other people have, and so on, built up research infrastructure, data sets, and I think your main contribution, Steven, is that, to sharpen our conceptual apparatus. So what you have given us is like ein Früchtekorb, a basket of fruits with wonderful juicy mangoes and a pineapple, and we have all been eating from that and digesting, and sorry, the metaphor breaks down here. We have been working through this basket of fruit, because as soon as we digested the mango, you come up and give us a new concept, a new fruit as a gift to all of us that we have then eaten, digested, worked with, played around with, modified, transformed, and so on. And of course, you also have been an institution builder. I know very few people who have your kind of talent to build institutions, to bring people together, to keep them in a good mood, to make them, you know, shine, and to bring them to do their best work. And this is really an amazing talent. And that's, of course, Compass, the Transcom, I think it was called, a big funding exercise, and then, of course, the NPI here in Göttingen. And part of that is also to publish this incredible number of edited volumes, handbooks, special issues, and so on. So I counted 32, but you said this morning it's 39, so I missed 7. So it's just that, I mean, if you put it up from the bottom here, it's a pile like that or something like that. It's incredible, and that's not just quantity, but it also means this provided publishing opportunities for dozens and dozens, probably hundreds of people who were able to publish in these edited volumes, in the special issues, and so on. So you were also, and many people have said that already, but I want to mention that again, you have been an incredible mentor for a lot of people. And you also have been a very skilled networker. I would like to do a little network analysis with you, Steve, and just trace your co-authors, the people who are your friends or claim to be your friends. And I think it would be a global spanning network that you have developed. And I don't know of anybody who doesn't like you, which makes me suspicious almost. You don't seem to have enemies, although you have made very pointed arguments. And you know, we academics, we are usually a very acerbic, very bitter, kind of infighting kind of tribe. We are probably not the best at building community, but you have done this. You brought all these different people with very different views on a range of issues together. And I think that goes together with institution building, but I think it's also a separate skill, and you have become the most important convener, I would say, of conversations that have to do with diversity and migration on both sides of the Atlantic, or maybe even globally. So here I can only focus on one of these aspects of what you've done for us, and which is I will focus on the substantial contributions, and I'm going to do this relatively superficially, so I'm not going to delve deeply in any of these conceptual contributions. And with apologies to Steve and to everybody else, but I think it's also good to maybe have a little overview over the entire oeuvre, and instead of digging deeper and having a serious conversation with just one of these conceptual contributions. So it's 5 as I see it. Well, actually I did a lot of bibliometric study of Steve, so I spent long afternoons. I should have asked ChatGPT to do it, but I did it myself. Looking through your CV and saying, oh, this is about that, and then going to Google Scholar and say, these are the most cited, and they have been cited that many times, and then add everything up and so on. So maybe I should be more confident saying there's 5 main contributions in what you've published so far. And the first, of course, is Diaspora, and that was Steve's PhD in the Caribbean, in Trinidad and Tobago, on the Hindu diaspora. And then it broadened out to other Caribbean islands, to Canada, to the UK, and then you made some major conceptual contributions, and these contributions not only revitalized and redefined and sharpened the term diaspora that's traditionally connected to the Jewish experience, but you also gave it analytical depth and precision, and that's one of your signature features, to define precisely what something means, what it doesn't mean, what are its different aspects, its different manifestations, its different types, phenomenological types, and so on. And you gave it a genuine comparative dimension that made it a useful term for a whole range of studies in different parts, different field sites across the world. The second term that you worked on is multiculturalism. So this is a term that emerged in policy-making fields in Canada firstly, and then elsewhere in the 1970s. There was also early political philosophy that used the term. And so you brought this term to the social science field, to made it a useful tool also for analyzing not only describing certain policies that are self-declared multicultural policies, but to make it a tool for understanding contemporary societies as a kind of a conglomerate of different immigrant origin communities, diasporically related, some of them to their real or imagined places of origin. And so what I like best about the way that you sharpened the term is by kind of taking it out of this very specific context of Western policymaking and the Canadian contexts. I remember, and you remember too, that we were part of this Canadian network, which was called, what was it called again? It still exists, I think. Yeah, and so the... Whatever. So it seems it doesn't exist anymore, otherwise everybody would know it. Because the Canadians... Yeah, Metropolis. Does it still exist? Yeah. And the Canadians were kind of using this network as a kind of a propaganda tool to push multiculturalism à la Canadienne down everybody's throat. In any case, so you took it, your work on multiculturalism kind of takes it out of this very specific context and makes it an analytical tool. And by linking it also to older anthropological discussions on plural societies, which is a long tradition that goes back to the 1930s and 40s, and by linking it back to historically older multicultural formations such as empires. And I think that's a really useful, slightly provocative, but useful way to open up the analytical horizon when we study contemporary multicultural societies. So that was I thought, and everybody thought, an interesting and useful and fruitful way of using the term multiculturalism. Then the next term, next fruit that you laid in our feeding basket was transnationalism, of course, linking back to your earlier work on diaspora, but giving it a much broader kind of conception, generalizing the phenomena of migrant diasporas to transnational linkages of all kinds, not only migrant communities, but by all kinds of other connectivities of a transnational nature that were deepening and expanding and multiplying with wave of globalization, economic, financial, and so on, that swept over the world from the 1980s onwards, and then especially, of course, after the fall of the Iron Curtain. Cosmopolitanism is another term that Steve has brought up, organized conferences, wrote crucial pieces about it, edited volumes, and so on. And that's, of course, an existing term, and the way that Steven, I think, again, very usefully and kind of sharpened by his anthropological sensibility, or rather by his sensibility as an anthropologist, gave it an empirical turn and focused on everyday forms of cosmopolitan ways of thinking and behaving and so on that you find not only in elite circles, the liberal elites that were circulating in that time and that were described as cosmopolitan elites, but also by looking at cosmopolitanism from below, by looking at everyday forms of cosmopolitan orientations that you found among immigrant communities and other kind of peoples at the margin of this emerging globalized world. And finally, of course, super diversity. and it kind of replaced multiculturalism as the main analytical tool to understand contemporary immigrant societies. And as everybody knows here, so the emphasis here is now on heterogeneity of migrant origins, legal statuses, social positions, and these heterogeneity and complexity is such that you can no longer bundle, as it were, this complexity into the idea of clearly delineated, clearly identifiable communities, ethnic communities or other, as was of course the underlying assumption in the multiculturalism phase, or when describing contemporary immigrant societies as multicultural. Although Steve has always, to his credit, in his work on multiculturalism, warned against and offered tools to avoid these kinds of essentializing immigrant or ethnic communities that was part of some other kind of strands of multicultural thinking. So that's the 5 major conceptual tools that Steve has given us, and this is the fruit of my long weekends of digging through the data, so you can see how these concepts pop up over time. This is the number of publications, only those with a substantial citation count, which in Steve's case can be quite high. I think I had to choose a cutoff point of 100 or something like that in order not to be swamped in the data. So that's how it looks like. So we have the diaspora wave from 1809 to roughly 2006. Then these waves are overlapping, obviously. Then you have the multiculturalism wave from 94 to 2013. And then you have the transnationalism wave with this massive output of publications in the early 2000s. And then there's an outlier in 2023, a late kind of reflection on transnationalism. The cosmopolitan wave in the first 2 decades of the 21st century, and then the super diversity wave from 2017 roughly to today. So you see these different phases, and since I was already doing this kind of number crunching, I thought let's go one step further and just aggregate these citation counts for the publications related to these different topics. And you can see that transnationalism is still by far the most popular, if whatever Google citation counts mean, but it means something. And then followed by super diversity. That might change, in the future. I'm sure that super diversity will trump everything else, not so far. And then multiculturalism, diaspora, and cosmopolitanism have a much lower. You can also see the last 2 columns that he has a very clearly bundled kind of oeuvre. So of his total of 45,000 citations, 38,000 are related to any of these 5 topics. So it's a relatively clearly defined set of work over the decades. Other people will jump from one thing to the next or have a different kind of publication strategy also. But Steve has this conceptually very coherent and very focused kind of research output. 47,000 is a lot overall, so we all know that your work has been very influential, but just so that it doesn't get to your head, so Edward Said's Orientalism has 120,000 citations, so there's still a lot for you to do, and we are all optimistic that you'll get there eventually. Okay, so of course, this is kind of messed up, sorry, the PowerPoint, for some reason. So I want to just say something not very deep, but maybe interesting of how I think that these, more from a sociology of science kind of point of view, how these conceptual developments that Steve went through are mirroring larger social trends. They're part of larger social trends in Western immigrant societies. So the first point, so assimilation theories is of course the background, that's what came before multiculturalism, transnationalism, and everything else. And assimilation is of course both a set of theories in the social sciences and a set of policies. And it's tied, at least in my view, to kind of a Fordist society, tightly integrated welfare states that developed after the Second World War, very tight and widely shared national identities forged in the fire of 2 world wars. So it's in this context that assimilation theory and assimilation policies had emerged. And they were then replaced with, when these Fordist consensus and institutional arrangements started to show cracks from the 70s and 80s onwards, and you have a liberalization of economies that started for real in the 1980s. And so multiculturalism provided an alternative kind of description of and offer of identification that replaced the assimilationist, implicitly nationalist consensus that existed before. And the two terms, diasporas and multiculturalism, I think are kind of related to that broader shift away from the perspectives that dominated in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and that were tied to these larger structural transformations of Western societies. Then comes a phase of intense economic, financial, social, including migration, globalization from the neoliberal turn of the 1980s onward, when it really took off, and accelerated by the fall of the Iron Curtain, and then from then on in the 90s, the emergence of a kind of a hegemonic, globally hegemonic, liberal global order, both discursively in the way that, the triumph of human rights discourse, of all kinds of rights discourses, and on the level of economic regulations, or rather deregulations and so on, that kind of tied together with the rights, individualist rights kind of discourse at the discursive level. And I think that transnationalism and cosmopolitanism kind of fit into that moment, mirror also some of the, at least cosmopolitanism, some of the aspirations of that time and of that global liberal order. Cosmopolitanism describes the appropriate individual cultural predisposition to further and deepen this global debordered global order, and the same for transnationalism. It basically maps the transformation that globalization brought about. It conceptually kind of is linked to hopes for a post-national age where all kinds of global connectivities will replace, the nationally bundled solidarities of the 40s nation state. And then later on, you have increasing critiques of the multicultural and also the neoliberal order, both from the left with, the resurgence of anti-racist theories, political programs, and so on and so on. And then a little bit later on, from the neo-nationalist right, for both of whom multiculturalism became kind of a boogeyman, the dead horse that everybody keeps beating, the anti-racist left, of course, accuses multiculturalism of being a romanticizing distortion of an exclusionary racist reality. And from the right, from the neo-nationalist right, multiculturalism is kind of a tribalist project that undermines national solidarity and leads to conflict and mutual accusations of, and so on and so on. And at the same time, you have new identity-based movements, disability, transgender, intersectionality. You have diversity as a concept that replaces multiculturalism. Diversity from the 2005 or something like that becomes hegemonic, becomes the new mantra, replacing multiculturalism as a policy at the level of governments, at all different scales, from the local level, as we've seen, all the way to the national level, institutions, from corporations to universities and so on, have picked this up. And Steve's contribution to this larger, heterogeneous, conflictual field is the term superdiversity. It kind of emerges together with these other. And I've never talked with you about this, Steve, but I see yours as a kind of, if you want to make a kind of a meta-analysis, like a humanist/individualist vision of how, of contemporary society that emphasizes multiplicity, heterogeneity, and irreducibility of individual experiences, and that's the humanism of it, and kind of the shared struggle that people are having to find the good life for them, to survive, to find community, to find some kind of environment where their children can grow up, and so on and so on. So this is just some thoughts of how your work has been embedded in larger social developments. Everybody's work is part of the society, social transformation processes, of course. So let's look at beyond these concepts, the 5 concepts, and this is a word cloud, and I did this because recently you moved into kind of data visualization, so I thought, let me put this into the Festschrift as a kind of a teaser for Steve that hopefully he will appreciate. So these are based on the titles of your, I think, 120 most cited works. These, if you feed this into a word cloud machine, it produces different results every time you do it, so I don't know, it's not a stable result or anything, so it's more for your entertainment. But I would like to highlight terms other than the 5 big ones, like cosmopolitanism, diaspora. So you have complex, you have transformation, you have complex again, social organization of difference, international, and so on. So this is just a jumping board, because I would like to now talk a little bit about what I think in your reading and rereading of your work are the key kind of characteristics of how you do your work, your analytical habitus, as it were, that has kind of remained remarkably stable, I think, throughout your career, although you've talked about a lot of different things, but I think these 5 features of your way of thinking, of approaching problems and so on, kind of stood out for me. The first is kind of you have a social structural approach to everything that you talk about, and it's deeply influenced by Manchester School of Anthropology where you grew up with. And I remember that was also, on a personal note, the commonality, because I was originally in anthropology and also trained in that tradition, and we discovered that the first time we met and we bonded on our shared kind of Manchester, Gluckman, and so on, Turner, kind of Harris. We discovered we have the same ancestors in our totem pole, on our intellectual totem pole sitting on the top. What this means is that you look at cultural difference as organized within complex social configurations that are historically shaped by social hierarchies, by political movements, by institutional orders, and so on. And so this kind of social structural or institutionalist, whatever you want to call it, approach to study culture, ethnic difference, and so on, it contrasts with psychological reductionism, where difference is basically equated with, or perceptions of difference with stereotypes, or worse, with prejudice. And it's something in the head of people. And you have always emphasized, the social environment and the social world within which perceptions of cultural difference are negotiated and emerge in the first place. It also stands in opposition to kind of a cultural reductionism where you say, well, people behave differently and that's then, or have different normative patterns, and that just then emerges, is mirrored in the perceptions and discourses that people developed. So that would be kind of an essentialist stance, and you again emphasized how these perceptions are shaped not only by cultural styles of behaving or normative orientations, but also by the social structures of inequality, by the institutional incentive structures, and so on. And this also contrasts with a kind of an economistic reductionism, where you would see these perceptions or actually objective cultural differences, the mere outcome of rational decision making by people under constraints who have different kinds of options. And most explicitly, this social structural approach is highlighted in this 2021 article. I'm very glad that this article was mentioned today several times. Susanna's and your contribution was organized around it. It also showed up in the last contribution. And of all your work, Steve, if I would have to choose one and burn everything else, or rather delete it on my computer, I would keep this article, which I think is really terrific. And it sums up this kind of specific approach to understand the production, maintenance, and transformation of cultural differences in our societies really well. This has already been said, so what does this imply? Configurations of social inequality, categorization processes where ethnicity in this piece is only one among many other forms of categorization, so it's a very broad piece, and then everyday social interactions. So this is the first, and the second is the emphasis on context dependency. That is throughout Steve's work. That's of course a mainstay of social anthropological ways of looking at the world that you have kind of kept with you. And it contrasts with the search for recurring patterns across contexts, as in quantitative research. It's not incompatible with it in principle, but that's not what you usually do. You usually emphasize the contextual differences, very much kind of in the case study mode of thinking about the world. And you can see this in your early work on the Hindu diasporas, which maybe I would like to keep this book rather than the 20, or maybe I'll keep both. You can see this in this analysis of the Hindu diaspora, where in the Caribbean you emphasize the history of indentured labor migration and how it shapes the community formation processes, the boundary making towards the Creole majority, the political struggles, and so on. In North America, the Hindu communities emerged from voluntary immigration, mostly high-skilled labor, which gives the community a very different characteristic, much stronger linkages to India, back and forth travels and so on. And in Britain, it's yet another configuration. So you emphasize these contextual differences very often and throughout your work. The third characteristic is the truly global and comparative perspective that goes throughout your work. So you have never become a Americanist, or how do you call the people who study the UK? Great Britanist? Or you know what I mean. You have never become, or a Germanist. You have always maintained the comparative lens, and which is of course also inherited from a certain kind of brand of anthropology. And so the studies that you've been involved with range from Singapore to South Africa to India to Europe, and so on and so on and so on. And you've used the resources of the Max Planck Institute also to diversify the places where people who do migration and diversity research, broadly speaking, do their research. You funded also with earlier initiatives that you had an enormous number of studies in outside of the western corner of the world. And I think this has provided cumulatively, just over time, a much needed and welcome counterweight against the chronic Western centrism of migration research, which is notorious and hasn't moved despite your heroic efforts. But if I look at the at the overall, what's in the journals and what's in the conferences and so on, it has moved a little bit, but actually not that much. So I think this is a third, I think I just said this. So the fourth characteristic is that has the capacity, somebody else mentioned that before, I think Susan, you did, to synthesize, or somebody else, I can't remember, synthesize vast amounts of research that other people have done across disciplines, from the hard social science to the soft social science, religious studies, some economics, history, and so on and so on. And to not only, in the style of annual review pieces, to not just go through it and list it, but to synthesize it, to bring it together, to use this these vast literatures for as kind of material to come up with sharpened conceptual tools to bundle the research enterprise further in the future. And of course, this is this synthesizing and agenda setting work that is so characteristic of your work. It's not very popular these days. Today, at least in the corners of the scientific enterprise where I'm playing around right now, the tendency is to find clearly identified, causally identified effects using vast data sets, ingenious research designs, experiments, randomized control trials, and all of this. So in this contemporary stage of the social sciences, we find one effect after the other, and in often contradicting each other. So opposite effects in the second study than that was found in the first study. So there is, I think, an ever greater need for this kind of synthesizing, agenda-setting work. Otherwise, we're just spinning kind of in the empty, chasing one effect after the other. And the last characteristic is Steve's capacity to identify trends, to identify the new thing. And I think most of the concepts that I've talked about of these five are trend diagnostic, trend diagnoses. So there's transnationalism now. There was much less transnationalism before. We're in a multicultural society now. We were in a different kind of society before. Now it's super diversity, while we had simpler forms, less complex forms of diversity before. And this is kind of not anthropological. I don't think it comes out of anthropology. I think it's more related to certain strands of sociology, especially in the UK and in Germany, kind of where big trends, modernization trends or something like that, are identified and pinned down. And I would like to offer some comments on this. And so I'm offering these comments as a historically oriented social scientist who is interested in the long term, meaning 200 years or something like that. And so one of the problems with trend diagnosis is that history goes really fast, you know, and as soon as you've pinned down the nature of multiculturalism, it disappears, and multiculturalism as a concept, maybe also as a social reality, is no longer around. As soon as you identified and pinned down transnationalism and what's happening, you have a reversion of the trend, and there's no longer there's deglobalization, which is the new keyword. There's lots of conferences now on deglobalization. You have a resurgence of nativist, nationalist movements with very powerful consequences also for how people dare or do not dare to identify transnationally, or do actually have transnational lives going back and forth between different places. And so I think it would be worthwhile, and so I'm basically making suggestions what Steve should do now, to enlarge the time horizon, and then you can see maybe very interesting patterns that you can't see if you focus only on the last 20 years and identify a trend. Then you can maybe identify recurring patterns. Maybe you can identify ups and downs. Maybe there's cyclicality in certain kinds of things that we're interested in and studying. Similar to economics, where there's cyclicality. There's the short economic cycles, but there's also longer ones. And similar maybe to hegemonic cycles that political scientists have studied a lot. So could maybe modern societies evolve discontinuously, like in this little graph? You know, it's still an increase overall, you know, on average. If you look from very far, then you see just the line going up, but this process is actually discontinuous, going through swings, up and down swings. So this is an old idea of a sociologist, I don't know whether you've heard of him, Borngier, who has a really interesting conceptual but also empirical apparatus to make this argument plausible. Or to hark back to another intellectual tradition, maybe we have hegemonic power cycles that I already mentioned. Maybe we have economic growth and decline cycles. Maybe we have periods of globalization and deglobalization that world systems theory has talked about and empirically researched. So if I may go back to this, so we would have a period of rapid globalization before World War I, when you had basically global free trade, when you had massive migration movements all across the world, where you had global spanning empires within which all kinds of cultural diffusion processes happen. And then you have after World War I, the borders were shut, the economies looked inward, you had the development of all these arsenals of national economic policy makings, there were trade barriers going up, and so on and so on. And this kind of characterized these relatively closed off Fordist societies up to the 60s, and then you have the next thrust of global opening, maybe until now, 2025, maybe we're again in a downturn. There is all these kind of discussions of decoupling from China, from the US, and in other parts of the world as well. Maybe it's going to happen, maybe it's not going to happen. I'm just suggesting this as a possibility. And so maybe these short-term trends they identify, from the 2000s onwards, there is super diversity, or from the 80s, 90s onwards, there is increasing transnational, and maybe these short-term trends are embedded in larger social processes of a more complex nature. So maybe there is phases of increasing global migration, increasing transnationalism, increasing liberalism in how to deal with migrant communities that are followed then by sharp reductions in the volume of migration, in deglobalization, economically, financially, detransnationalization, neo-assimilationalism, and neo-nationalism, replacing the liberalism of the previous wave. We could also enlarge the time horizon towards the future, not only towards the past, but also to seek to peak around not just around the corner of time into the next decade or so, but to seek out the long horizon and see what we can identify there. And this is, of course, massively speculative, because sadly there's no data on the future. By the way, I tried to publish an article on how the world will look like in 250 years, and I tried to publish it in these futurist journals. I don't know whether you know that this exists. It's a discipline, and they didn't want it because I did not proceed in the way that they want you to proceed. They basically want you to make up data and then analyze the data as if it were real, so that future studies is a respectable social science discipline. So the disciplinary gatekeepers, one journal after the other, sorry, that's just a nasty side comment. I hope that there's not too many futurologists here in the room. In any case, so it's evidently speculative and impossible, but I think it's a useful exercise to try to look at the long term, because it makes you realize how much of the current trends are actually tightly linked to the macro conditions, macro social, macro political, economic conditions of the present. And only if you relax the time horizon all the way to the future, you realize how much current trends are tied into certain aspects of the contemporary world that certainly will change in the very long run. So let me just give you three little ideas here. So will the nation state survive? In the long term, it will not. In 200 years, it's going to be some other forms of organizing politics on a global scale. What will replace it? If the new political arrangements is not states with clearly defined territorial boundaries, a Westphalian principle. If we let go of the Westphalian principle of organizing politics, then there's not going to be migration, which is completely tied to the Westphalian principles of states that have people, and then people move from one state to the other, and then this is conceived as a problem, and is, there's a whole intellectual apparatus trying to understand what these other people are doing here or not, and so on. So is it the end? Are we going to see the end of migration? What does this mean? So I think these are important questions. And then there's demographic processes also. So we're used to a scenario where there's more and more and more and more people in the world. And according to recent estimates, this will come to a peak sometimes between 2055 and 2080. Then the population, world population, will start, according to these projections, to shrink dramatically, and going towards the Korean situation, where I think the fertility rate is now 0.7.
massive, rapid shrinking of population. China has 1 now. The replacement level is 2.1 children per woman. Okay, so will we see a global competition for young people? Will everybody race to get the young people? A completely new scenario, if you think about it, compared to today. And then I'm harking back to your, the last presentation that we heard today. There's, of course, technological developments that the current situation is tied to a certain techno-material basis that is in the process of changing rapidly. So what does AI mean for the future of migration and diversity? What will happen when most people are basically no longer useful? At least people of average intelligence like myself and some others here in the room, Steve, not you, but we will, the machines will be able to do it much better, way faster, and they don't even need a salary, just a little bit of juice. So will this reverse the preference for high-skilled migration? Everybody's now racing to get the highly skilled people. Will everybody race to get the people who are willing to work with their hands still until the robots take over? So these are just very speculative questions. And thank you, Steve, for reminding me my time is over. Perfect. So these are big questions, both the looking backwards over the long term and looking into the long-term future. And my solution to all of this is Steve's got to do it. You have to figure all of this out. And I learned yesterday, we had dinner, I learned that you're actually already on the way to do that. So I didn't know that. So you have I think, fascinating plan to work about the future of difference. And I think you're planning podcasts and a Substack and a YouTube channel and so on and so on. And so we all look forward to continuing to learn from you as you tackle these big, complicated futurologists and other kind of questions. And so I would like to end this with an encouraging onward, Steve.
Well, first of all, challenge accepted. Just say that already thinking about that stuff. But just to reflect on the whole thing, there's lots to say about everything that everybody's presented already today. And I can't go into everything. We don't want to be here, and I don't want to talk for that long. Let me just say about the day as a whole. It's not as bad as I thought it was going to be. Kind of, frankly, kind of dreading it, having to sit through here, and what my friend Rob was saying, it could be like people singing Happy Birthday for 8 hours, but it wasn't that. It was absolutely wonderful, mainly to see what people presented, the stuff, and the recap. First of all, the stuff, just super interesting papers in themselves. Even taking me out of it, super interesting to sit through and listen to all of those. And then listening to Andreas's overview, sitting there like, oh, really? That's me? Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, maybe it was. So that was really nice. And I think, well, first of all, coming here, I was kind of dreading it, but as my wife, Astrid, was saying, it's a good thing when you really dread something, then it's never quite as bad as that, isn't it? So that was a good strategy that I inadvertently did. But really, really great to hear all this stuff, and just to see everybody. I mean, that's that's the best part of the whole day, and worth the kind of cringing having to sit through it, people talking about me. But people talking about different attributes, I suppose, that they say that I have or whatever. I don't really know about those, or I don't want to comment on those, except that there is one attribute or skill that I would boast about, that I think I have, and that is I'm really good at picking students and postdocs and colleagues and friends and sons, and that's what it's all about. And I really appreciate that I have been in positions where I've been able to do that. I've been in control, and together with Karin, and have somebody that I could share some of the picks with as well, to be able to pick all of you to work with. And if you got something out of some of my work, great, but as I think people would attest, I never pushed anybody in that direction. A lot of people totally did their own thing, even though sometimes I suggested doing something else. I'm looking at Tillman. We had many fights. I said, don't do that, Tillman. No, I'm going to do that. To your credit, you didn't listen to me something. So that was excellent. So yeah, just really appreciative to everybody, and huge thanks again, Zakura, Chris, Marina, G, Dagmar, for this is a hell of a lot of work today and tomorrow. I mean, wait till tomorrow. It's even a bigger kind of operation that they put together. So huge thanks to everybody for that. I could have responded to every single paper today. Maybe we'll get a chance to do that, and especially the last thing. I'd like to talk to you about that curve, and I've got some answers. We'll see where that goes. As people know, this was supposed to be a kind of retirement thing, but to my huge embarrassment, I'm not actually retiring now. So maybe it'll be a chance for us to do this again at some point. But in any case, it is marking a kind of a closure. For our institute, we're transitioning, and I'm going to be transitioning more to this other kind of less academic thing, pointing towards podcasts and Substacks and all that kind of stuff. So, maybe it is a right thing to have this kind of event marking this. But again, huge thanks to everybody. That's all I've got to say. I'm glad you might have found something in Worth, or at least a kind of sparring partner, but that's always good. It's always interesting and crazy to find out what people do with some of your ideas, as Susan, you already pointed out. Sometimes, people have taken and run with the ball that I passed them, and I'm like, you're going in the wrong direction. But that's not for me. I've passed on the ball, so that's okay. And onwards, we'll see where it goes. All of these balls that have been passed on, and maybe passed it back to me at some point, and see what I'll do with it. And I could use a drink. I don't know about you. Let's do that. Thanks, everybody, and let's continue tomorrow. Thanks so much. Not necessary. Not necessary.